So as we begin this morning, we're studying the word all, and what does that encompass, and how do we get that in our attitudes and our lives today. And we started in Luke 10 in verse 27, and we talked about love God with all your strength, with all your mind, with all your soul, your whole being. And then we looked at Matthew, where it talks about all of the other laws hang on this. So then we moved into 2 Peter chapter 1, and we talked about giving all diligence. And what does that include? And we are building on the love your God commandment with all diligence. We looked at Noah in chapters 6 and 7 of Genesis, how he was diligent his whole life, how he did all that the Lord commanded him to do. And then last week we looked at Hebrews 13:18, in all things desiring to live honorably. And then we looked at Romans 12, and Claude said Romans is kind of a roadmap for us, and I agree with that. And then we looked at a little bit of 1 Corinthians 13, talking about the love and what it does. So we're building on what we're trying to do with the word all. So today, let's think about all have sinned. All have transgressed. And we'll go to Romans chapter 3. And Romans is a book that God chose to write when he allowed Paul's pen to show his personality. Paul is throughout Romans, and it is very detailed, if you will. There is a lot of information in Romans. We could put our plow very deep and stay in Romans for a whole quarter, the whole year. And I don't know that we could get every principle that's taught in Romans in a year. But Romans chapter 3 is teaching us that God's righteousness comes through faith. So what is faith? What does Hebrews say that faith is? Substance of things hoped for. What is substance? The meat, something that you can hold, right? Can you hold your faith? Is it cherishable? Is it a action that someone can see? Whose faith did the people see that climbed the roof and the gentleman lured the friend through? Whose faith was it? The carrier's faith? I submit to you that I agree with that, but it also could be the guy laying on the cot. I remember Doug saying that one time. He could have been going, "You've got to get me there. I don't care if you believe it or not. I will pay you. I will show you. I've got to go." Could it have been both? Absolutely. So how do we take all have sinned, and we look at Romans chapter 3, and then we get to righteousness through faith? So Romans chapter 3. The context actually begins in verse 9. The chapter begins in verse 1, talking about God's judgment was defended. Paul was teaching, and he said, God is the just God. God is going to do what he says he's going to do. And then he comes to verse 9. What then? Are we better than they? Not at all. What does that phrase mean? Not at all. I'm sorry? Carol said, basically it's saying, nope, you're not any better. That word that we're trying to focus on, not at all. That's a a statement that has, what's the word? Conviction. Confidence. No, not at all. It ain't happening. It is not going to happen. We use it sometimes in our taste. If you don't like something, you don't like something to eat, I don't like it at all. Not at all, right? You don't want any part of it. Yes, David said an emphatic way of saying no. So what is God teaching us here when he says, are we better than they? Who's he talking to? He's talking to the Jews. He wrote it to the Jews and he says, wait a minute, are you better than the Gentiles? Not at all. He has got everybody in that one little word, correct? Yes, sir. God said that he included the Jew and the Gentile in the words, all have sinned. It includes everybody. So as we think about everybody, are we better than they? Not at all. For we have previously charged both what? Jew and Greek, that they are what? All under sin. Who's not under sin? No one. It's a little bit redundant for us to say it out loud, isn't it? Not at all. Jew and the Greek. Who is under sin? All. Everyone. That's right. God said that we may have a hard time grasping how nasty the world was at this time. When these words were penned, everybody was living for themselves. They were selfish. God's commandments was not there. They wasn't listening to them. No, not one, verse 10 says. He referenced that. And let's just read it, because as it is written, there is none righteousness, no, not one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after God. They all have turned aside. They have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good, no, not one. Their throat is an open tomb. With the tongues they have practiced deceit. The poison of apes is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways. All the way of the peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. God is exactly right. How bad was it? It was Sodom and Gomorrah bad. Yeah, Clyde referenced they didn't even fear God, the creator of all things. So if I ask you the opposite of all, what are you going to tell me? None. It's the same concept, right? Just looking at it from the other side. All or none. Nothing in between. I think so. Carol asked, is it more of a nation, more of a general, is all of America bad? Is all of Europe bad? You know, and she referenced Noah. Genesis 6 and 7, mankind was doing, but God saw that Noah found grace. So it possibly could be that concept. It could be all of the Jews, all of the Greeks, and then there's Christians there that could be maybe trying to do right. But it's interesting because he says, no, not one. So is that literal? Is that no, not one? Is that everybody was corrupt at this time? Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Right. That's a good point. She was saying that Paul is referencing Psalms, David, when he wrote the Psalms, and how bad was it on the world then, and that shed some light on the possibility of it being all or no, not one. None of them had the fear of God. Those are all very good. Any other comments or questions?
In man's relationship with God, there was no man that was righteous, because man cannot be righteous in and of himself. And in that respect, all had sinned, and all had fallen short of righteousness. Only because of God's love for man and the mercy that he extended is man able to have the forgiveness of sins and to be counted as righteous before God. Before Christ came, all they had was animal sacrifices, and we know that they could not take away sin. And Paul is writing this now many years after the establishment of the church, the coming of the beginning of the revealing of the New Testament. And he's still writing as far as man's relationship with God. All have sinned, and there's none righteous. If that be the case, why did Christ have to die if there were some that were righteous in and of themselves? So, in my mind, in that regard, all have sinned and none are righteous in their relationship with God. And that goes all the way back to Adam and Eve.
Sure. Ken said that basically that no man is righteous with God on his own account. It was because of the mercy and the grace of God for us that all have sinned, all are not righteous. And that's the concept. We can't be righteous on our own. And, in the Old Testament, the sacrifices were animals. They didn't take away the sin. And if they had been righteous people, Jesus wouldn't have had to die. And now that Jesus died, we're righteous because of God. And that's a good point. That's the way we have to look at it. And in that regard, all includes everyone. It has to. Do you have a comment, or are you good?
Have you ever gotten in an argument with someone that you say something like, you never disagree, or you always do this? Well, no. Sometimes I do listen, sometimes I don't do whatever. But we use that terminology, but we don't literally mean say you always do something or you never do something, you cannot sin. And but if we have sin, then we have the ability to sin, then we can become like
Carol referenced, have you ever been in an argument and said, you never listen to me, or you always do this? Well, we probably have listened at some point, or we don't always do something. And she referenced the infants that have the mind to sin, and those that are mentally challenged or sick, they don't have the ability to sin. So is the word being used as an all, like we would say, well, you always do that or you never listen to me? And that's a good point. It's probably talking about the ones that we would say at the age of accountability, whatever that age is. I mean, it's not 13, but seems to be in the church, when you get 13, you're supposed to be baptized. I'm not saying that at all. But I think it's teaching, and y'all help me if it's right. If you have the ability to understand, that's where it's talking about the all. That's what we're talking about, right? Because there are people that the babies obviously don't sin, and those that are mentally challenged don't have that ability. So he's talking to the ones that chose to do wrong, right?
Mm-hmm. And now we come to Romans, which I don't know how many years, somebody probably got between the flood and here, and they are ruthless, sinful, everybody, again.
Mm-hmm.
So does that say that, I think it says very clearly, humans are prone to sin.
That's the important part. Prone to. Claude referenced Noah. How many people were on the earth when Noah saved? Those are 8 people. At one time I heard at least 1 million because of the way they multiplied and they moved. And it could have been very easily more than that. So what percentage if you take conservative 1 million people, what percentage is 8 of 1 million? And then now we get to Romans, and Claude referenced, here we are again. It's just like the children of Israel. They would follow God, and then they'd fall away. And then at the end he said, those people that humankind are prone to sin. That's where we have to concentrate on what we're talking about. Yes, sir. Yes. That's right. Doug said for him, and it's right, an easy way to understand this verse is those that are capable of sinning. Those that are capable of sinning have sinned. Because there's in that category of those that are not capable. Thank you. That's good. Anything else? So how do we have righteousness through faith? We've talked about the capability of sinning. We've talked about everybody's going to make that choice. Either subconsciously or consciously, we have chose to sin. But we've also chose to do what's right, correct? We've chose to obey God. So let's look at these verses. Well, let's just pick up in 19 because that'll get us to 21 for the next context. Now when we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law that every mouth may be stopped and all the world may become guilty before God. Who is all the world? That's exactly what Doug just said. That's what we've been talking about, right? The world, all the world may become guilty. If you have the capability, at some point you're going to be guilty. All the world is guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. For by the law is under the knowledge of sin. But now the righteousness of God, apart from the law, is revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ to all and on all. Who's the to all? And who is the on all? To all is exactly the people that we've been talking about. It's you and I, correct? It's the ones that believe, Clyde said. That's exactly right. So how do you get it on you? Remember my honey reference? You spill honey, you get it all over you. What happens when we are immersed in the water? The water doesn't have anything to do with it other than God said, you got to get under the water, right? But how do we get in that water without getting it on us? That's the reference that he's saying, right? It's to all. And once that you have that capability and the understanding and the ability, and you get into the water and you're baptized for the remission of your sins into Christ, it's on you. There is no hiding it at that point. When I was younger, maybe didn't have as much sense, we played some paintball. You ever played paintball? I don't know what gives anybody the idea that this will be fun to put a helmet on and give somebody a gun, a rifle, and put some compressed air on it and shoot little paintballs at you. It is actually pretty fun. But Mike Isaacson, thank you for standing there, shot me between the eyes one day. And I had paint all over me. That's the visual I see. Y'all need to ask Mike how come he shot me one day. You remember that, Mike? Yeah, I thought I had him too. But I had to get out of the game for a few minutes because my face mask was complete. I couldn't see. It was all over me. That's the context that this verse is teaching. To all and on all. Who what? Believe. For there is no difference. There's no difference between the Jews. There's no difference between the Greeks. There's no difference between Americans, the Europeans. There's no difference. So the all that believe, that are capable, the ability to, it's all over us. That's how you get righteousness through Jesus. Let's look at verse 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by His blood through faith to what? To remove the remission of sins. The New King James says there, to demonstrate His righteousness, because His forbearance, God has passed over the sins that were previously committed. He demonstrated His righteousness to who? All that believed. All that believed. He's demonstrated it. To demonstrate at the present time His righteousness, that He might be just and the justifier of the one who has what? Faith in Jesus. Can you demonstrate your faith? I don't think it's a trick question. How do you, ma'am? You have to. That's exactly right. That's what she said. How do we have to? How do we do it? Clyde said that faith.
And it's here, it's in this book. It ain't floating around like the butterfly.
Right, right.
You gotta dig for it.
That's it. Clyde said that the faith is the foundation. It's in the book. We've got to go get it. Yes, sir, Ken.
James said, show me thy faith without works, and I'll show you my faith.
That's right. Ken referenced in James, show me thy faith and I'll show you the works. Show me no works and your faith is basically dead. Who worked to get the gentleman to the rooftop and lower him down to see Jesus? Who did the work? The men carrying him, his buddies. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't have faith. He probably did, laying on the cot. But those guys had some measure of faith, because they didn't say, you're crazy. I ain't taking you on the top of that roof. I'm not lowering you down. At some point, their work showed to the mass of people their faith. Oh, that's good. She saw a sign that said people may not read their Bible, but they will read the Christian. We talked about living honorably. We went through some examples. Is that a demonstration of faith? Is demonstration of faith when you love someone? Is a demonstration of faith when you get in your car and you choose to come to Bible class at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning? And you choose to be here for worship? Then you come back on Sunday night, then you come back on Wednesday night? Is all that a demonstration of faith? And is it getting stronger each time you demonstrate it? I think, yes. Clyde.
Good way to demonstrate honorable. Look at your military people, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine, whatever. You don't get out with a discharge if you hadn't served honorably.
That's right.
If you stay in jail all the time, you're going to get dishonorable discharge.
That's right. He referenced the military. You know, you're not going to get an honorable discharge if you're in jail all the time, or if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're living by the rules. That's what Romans chapter 3 is teaching us. And when we focus on the word all, the context is we have to be able to be in that group. We have the choice of being in that group. We have the capability, right, Doug? We have the ability. That, to me, is what Romans is teaching. Romans chapter 3, Romans chapter 12, we looked at it earlier. There's a lot in Romans that teach us how to live. Romans 3 teaches us all have sinned. The righteousness is for God. How do we do that? Let's turn over to James. James chapter 1. So, to me, James chapter 1 and Romans chapter 3 kind of go hand in hand. I know we've talked James 1, 2, and we say all the trials and rejoice in those, and that plays into it. But the righteousness through God for all, we have to be able to apply James 1. So let's look at it as well. The first verse is basically a greeting in James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Who's he writing it to? That's exactly right. He's writing it to the Jews, the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Greetings. He says, hello. And now here we go. Verse 2. My brethren, count it what? All joy. How do you have all joy? At our house last night, it was all joy for about 4 hours. But north of us, it was not all joy. I promise you. Those guys wearing the blue, they didn't like it. But how do we have all joy in our Christian life? Count it all joy. What? What's the next part of the verse? When you fall into various trials. Can you demonstrate your faith through a trial, that righteousness through Jesus Christ in Romans chapter 3, and now you're in a trial, can your faith become stronger? Can you count it all joy? How do you count it all joy when you're into a trial? That's a good point. Carol referenced Paul and Silas was singing at midnight in jail because Satan, they've made it hard on Satan, and it made them happy because they're looking for the reward, right? That's how you get all joy. Yes. That's right. That's a good point. Heather said that in trials, people look at us, how we're going to respond. And we can actually demonstrate more faith in the trials than we can if we're happy. How do we depend on God? How do we depend on our church family? How do we depend on our physical family? And those things can be very, very powerful, because that is when people look at us the most, is when we are in a situation that, we might be down on our luck a little bit. How are we going to handle it? Is that going to be a joyful time for us? Should be. Verse 3, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. How do you have real joy? Lacking nothing. Now, I'm not talking physical at all, but spiritually, we lack for nothing. And if we believe that we're going to have the righteousness through Jesus Christ that Romans 3 is teaching to all, and now we're thinking, these trials are pretty hard. What's the word in the King James? It slipped my mind. It's translated for trials. Clyde, have you got a King James? What is verse 2? Does it say trials? Divers temptations. Thank you. The temptations are the trials. What's your temptations? What's your trials? It's teaching that's where the real joy is. Because we know that Jesus has died for us and that He is going to have a reward. Our home is in heaven as long as we're obedient. That's where the real joy is. So the physical temptations and the trials mean nothing. Paul was in jail and he was singing. Have you ever been in jail and sang? I'm not asking you to raise your hand. I just want you to think about that thought process. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Verse 12 of James 1. Blessed is the man who endures temptations, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Exactly right, Clyde. Thank you. So as we work through this trial, there's a concept here that we have to think about. One is rejoice in all matters of life, good or bad. That's what James is teaching us. James is teaching us no matter the situation that we're in, we can be joyful all the time. And then verse 9 teaches us, verse 6 through 8, but let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For let not the man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. If he is a double-minded man, unstable in what? All of his ways. It teaches us to have confidence when we pray. Where's Elon? He's in Frank's class, I think. Several years ago, Elon was working at Pleasant Hill Congregation. And we went down there for a door-knocking campaign, and we were going to try to invite people to the building, to the worship service at Pleasant Hill. And it was pouring the rain. It was raining so hard that I questioned to go. So I got in my vehicle, and we meet at Pleasant Hill Church's building. And I remember saying to Elon, are we going to go? He said, yes. I prayed that God would give us 2 hours without rain that we could do His work. The man didn't bring an umbrella, and he did not bring a raincoat. He got out of his car, it quit raining, we worked for 2 hours, and we went home. Is that confidence when you pray? I'm not saying that God did anything miraculous that day, but Elon had enough confidence that he did not bring an umbrella. It's one thing to say for no rain or pray for rain, but it's another to say, I'm not even taking my umbrella. So how do we rejoice in all things, good or bad? And then we have prayer that has confidence on it, and we get the righteousness through Jesus in Romans 3. It's to all. Is those two contexts, is it not working together? Do they not mesh together in your mind? I think that's where we have to put some feet on it, if you will. Romans 3 is the map, but the map's not going to get us anywhere unless we go. So we got to get through some of these trials. We got to have the confidence. Any comments or questions? Yes.
Anyone that opens the Bible, God's Word, reads about Job, they don't read about, they may find out for a fact that he was a godly. That's not God. That's not how God used him. It was how his reaction to his trial that God said, okay, this is how we're going to use it for thousands of years. We read in that. It's not. There's a lot of godly people in the Bible that don't get books written about it because of how they face the trial. And that's just one. Many people have done it. But Job was an instrument of God saying, there's going to be trial. There's going to be trial. Just because you're godly doesn't mean there's not going to be either.
That's right.
How you react to them is how your faith can be seen.
Yes.
Which sometimes we fail.
Sure. That's right. Yeah. Jerry referenced Job. How many people today pick up their Bibles and read about Job? And how do they know that he was a God-fearing man? Maybe in the first chapter it may have said that. I don't remember. But the whole book was written because of his reaction to the trials. People saw that. So they knew he was a godly man based on that. And then he said there's a lot of people in the Bible that have those trials, that have that going on, but not a book was written by them or for them. An entire book was written about Job and his trials. So we as Christians have to have those trials, and sometimes, unfortunately, we fail. But we keep trying. Very good. Thank you for your comments and your kind attention, and we'll proceed next week, good Lord willing.